All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can email us, as always, at bigben@fox.com. You can follow me, Ben Domenech, on X at bdomenech. You can subscribe to my newsletter, The Transom, at thetransom.com, and to the magazine where I'm an editor, The Spectator, at thespectator.com. And I want to talk to you today about the latest activity as it relates to Donald Trump's war on the cartels. This is a topic that's obviously been in the ether around President Trump going back to his first term, when it was an idea laid forward by the likes of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and others. The idea that we were going to elevate these cartels to being actual terror groups and that we could target them via all these different methods that were available to us if we did so. That's something that the Trump administration decided to do for real this time around. And it resulted just yesterday in the targeting and destruction of a boat from Venezuela run by Tren de Aragua cartel members that was bringing drugs and fentanyl into the United States, with footage that you've probably seen by now, blowing the boat out of the water and killing, according to the president, 11 different members of the cartel. This is obviously an escalation. It's something that is different from what the United States approach has been before, which has been to capture these boats, to capture the drugs, and to put these people on trial through the justice system in a process that plays out over months and years, and really does not do anything to forestall the kind of deliveries of drugs that we've seen over the past several years to such a great degree, and to the great profit of these cartels all across the narco states that exist to our south. This is an escalation, but it's one that is being welcomed, I think, by a lot of Americans who otherwise don't want the United States to be involved in foreign conflicts. And there's some obvious reasons for that. One is obviously the border that we share with Mexico and the concern that we have about a failed state there that's potentially run by the cartels as opposed to the elected government, which is itself compromised in so many different ways, taking money from them and being manipulated by these very powerful narco companies that are essentially global companies in terms of their size, in terms of their reach, and in terms of their profits, leaning on drug smuggling, human trafficking, and other criminal activity in order to profit, and using the Mexican military and government to keep the people down, keep them in order. They assassinate any kind of politicians who emerge with a real possibility of creating some type of reform within the nation state. And they allow the dominance of the Morena Party, which previously was under AMLO and now is under Claudia Sheinbaum in the Mexican state, in order to maintain their power over the country and to control the funneling of the types of drugs that we've seen come into American streets over the past several years. Look, I understand that there are a lot of Americans who are more dovish when it comes to the use of American military might. But if you really do believe that America has to mind its business and mind it well, as the late Angelo Codevilla used to write and say, then I think that this is something that is well within the responsibility of the American government. And it's exactly the kind of thing that we've seen happen in America's past, even stretching back to Andrew Jackson, who was defended by the likes of John Quincy Adams when he went after the Spanish forces that were here in America and doing ill things. The idea being that if you have control over territory and people are using it to attack and harm the American people, then America has the obligation and the right to step in and make sure that the things that you don't want to do or that you cannot do get done in order to protect our citizenry. I think that we are about to see activity as it regards these cartels that we have never seen before, a level of stepped up hostilities that is no longer interested in capturing these different criminals and putting them on trial or in seizing their drugs, but in destroying them and destroying them in targeted ways. One thing to keep in mind about this is that the Mexican military and the other militaries that are in the region exist in order to control the people. They don't exist to defend these various nations. They don't exist to fire back at the kind of technological capabilities that the United States can deploy. We have a network of spy planes, helicopters, drones, and others that don't require American boots to be on the ground in any of these instances in order to reach out and touch these cartels in ways that completely and decimate their capabilities and set them really a significant way back. The argument will be made that these cartels will just reform, that they will, like Medusa, that you cut off some of the snakes and they grow back. But the truth is that this is about affecting Mexican policy and the policy of these nations internally. It's about forcing them to do things that they don't want to do, including when it comes to using their military in ways that they're actually supposed to use it for, including fighting back against these cartels, enforcing the laws that they have on the books. And if they don't do that, then I think that they're going to see an increased American presence, and they're going to see a lot more than just one ship with 11 cartel members blown out of the water. They're going to experience serious setbacks under this administration, which is no longer willing to accept that we have a temporarily good-looking border, something that is temporarily peaceful, that just goes back to being the way it was the instant that Donald Trump leaves office. They want a more permanent solution, and they are right to do the things necessary in order to achieve that. You're listening to The Big Ben Show. I'm Ben Domenech. We have some great guests today. Matt Taibbi, Mark Schlereth coming up next. Legend, three-time Super Bowl champion, Mark Schlereth. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today.
Well, NFL legend is a bit of a stretch, Ben, but I appreciate that. I see you got the Redskin. I see you got the Redskin coat on. So I you know what? You and I simpatico. I
have to tell you, the first Super Bowl, the first football game that I ever gambled on as a child was the one that you won for us.
Oh,
and it was a gamble with a fellow friend of mine, a child, and I put up a Star Wars figurine against a Nerf gun that he had that I wanted, and I got the Nerf gun. So you're a legend in my mind, at least.
Incredible. That's how you become a degenerate. So
exactly.
You start there with the Redskins, Buffalo, Super Bowl 26, and it just goes from there.
Exactly. So I want to talk to you about all sorts of things about this season and everything that's going on. But first off, I want to ask you a question just about your preparatory process. Obviously, you're going to be calling games this season. I believe you start with the Jags and the Panthers this weekend. When you're a couple days out from this and you're looking at the teams and the storylines, preparing for that call, what are some of the things that you most want to focus on and dig into, knowing what's likely to happen a little bit within some of the game context and some of the questions that are going to be raised? Obviously, both these quarterbacks in very different positions, but ones that had been coming into the league highly touted and have their own challenges. What are some of the things that you're focused on for that game?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The process consistently changes for me. I'm always all over the place. I study the game like a coach. I want to have a great global perspective of what goes on, how you attack certain formations, how you attack, certain coverages, what you're trying to do. So I have a great sense and a great respect for the coaching profession and what those guys put themselves through. And I've had the opportunity to consult, and I've turned down coaching jobs and some of those things because it probably is more work than I wanted to be involved in at the time, but it's kind of how I approach the game. And I don't know that it necessarily is always the right way to approach it, but it's what I love. I love to grind on film. I love to study. I will break down 3 games of each team, both offensively and defensively, what formations they run, what route combinations they run out of 3-by-1 versus 2-by-2, all these different things that I constantly am looking at, the run game and all that stuff. But the storylines, I think, are probably where I'm the weakest at, and what I need to improve upon most is getting involved in the storylines. And the storyline for this game is incredible. It's one of the top 5 or 6 storylines in football. One, Travis Hunter, University of Colorado, just two-way player, unbelievable what he has accomplished in his college career, and how are they going to use him in Jacksonville? They've said, and this is, Gladstone, their GM, has said, hey, man, I drafted him to play both ways. So, in my sense and sensibility as an NFL player, I'm just like, there's no way you can't do that. Like I'm out. Like,
this
no way,
isn't
it's
the
gonna
era of
work.
Sammy Baugh anymore. The
Right.
idea that you're going to be doing, leading the league in interceptions and touchdowns is just like, I mean, come on.
It's insane, but I had the opportunity to work with Dion last spring when Travis Hunter was a college player. And his level of fitness, his level of just ability on both sides of the ball is incredible. So then you start thinking, as a franchise, like, who holds his minutes? Like, where does he go? How does his day work from a day-to-day basis? Because, you invest so much as a player on the side of the ball that you're on, and you're in meetings from, 7 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening, and practice and all that. So who's going to divvy up that time? How does he work on both sides of the ball? What does it look like when the game rolls on? And then, for Trevor Lawrence, this is kind of, for both of these quarterbacks, either Bryce Young or Trevor Lawrence, this to me is, where the rubber meets the road. Like, are you going to become a great player like you were projected to be as a number one overall picks, or are you going to go down in the bust category? And to watch that kind of progression, we saw Bryce Young at the end of last season start to play pretty good football, although some limited things, but good job by their coaching staff, put him in positions to succeed, and then Trevor Lawrence having this kind of, where it looked like he was going to be really good, and then he's had this huge dip. And part of that is coaching. One of the things I always say about coaching, put a guy in a position to fail. Don't be surprised if he fails, because you're the dumbass that put him there. And so from a coaching standpoint, can you put a guy in a position to succeed? Your number one priority, I think, as a coach, is to mitigate potential disaster. And if you know a guy can't do something, well, then you can't put him in that position. You've got to say, hey, he's not good at this, but he's really good at these three things. Let's keep him in this, let's keep him in this bucket as opposed to this bucket.
One thing I'm curious about, just in terms of your process and prep, most of the commentary that I do on TV is about politics, and you've got kind of a beat where you have something happens in the news, late breaking or something like that, and then you wake up in the morning, you find out you're talking about it, and you've got an hour and a half to think about what you want to say. Obviously, that can be different if you're responding to a speech or something that just happened, but that's pretty rare. You have to respond to things as they're happening in front of you. So when you prepare for that, do you have like a sheet of notes, a legal pad, something that you use to kind of write some things? If something like this happens, this is one thing I want to be sure to point out. What's the process like, just given the fact that you have to be able to respond on the fly? You don't have that luxury of having, half an hour or an hour to sit in the green room and think about what you're going to say.
Yeah, it's all extemporaneous. There's certain situations and certain things that you think about um, as a player, as an ex-player, now a broadcaster. So I always think about situational football. What did I like when I was down in the red zone? Like, what did I like? What did I want to run? And then you have those, you have those things that you've studied in this, particular formation. They'd love to run this. Are they going to get to that? I always kind of try to think, to myself as the game is going on, hey, man, they're really running the crap out of this mid zone. What's the adjunct play action that they're going to get to? How can they create an explosive? Like those things, curiosity, I think, is always important in any profession. And then just being able to see something and boiling it down to its essence. You don't have a minute and a half to have this like podcast conversation, right? You can't get into a 2-minute diatribe on something. So it has to become these 20-second sound bites. And I think one of the really big issues when you see things from a global perspective, I always say that calling a game is like playing the accordion. And people go, well, can you play the accordion? No, I can't play the accordion. But you've got to kind of get this myopic view of what's going on. You've got to condense down to this myopic view, and then you've got to expand back out into the global perspective. And you've got to be able to have those things and boil it down to its essence. So I might see on one play 3 or 4 things that I like, But what's the headline? That's something I struggle with. What's the headline? Because I might see three things and I might end up getting to the headline eventually, but it's at the end as opposed to making a statement right now, bam, and then supporting that statement. And I think that's one of the real challenges and one of the keys to broadcasting a game. And frankly, you know what? I'm constantly working at it. I'm not nearly as good as I want to be. But they keep giving me opportunities. So I'm going to keep taking them and seeing if I can make something happen.
So, talk to me for a minute about how things have changed when it comes to line play. I was in Philadelphia at the NFC Championship where I saw that Eagles line just manhandle the Commanders' front in a way that was obviously dominant. And I mean, they had big plays too, but the point was that as soon as it became clear that they were going to be able to do what they wanted with that massive line that they've got, it was just a foregone conclusion to me the way that things were going to end up. As much as I cheered for Frankie Louvu jumping over, but it was one of these things where it seems to me that line play has kind of made a comeback in terms of going from being something that was maybe forgotten for a couple of years in these high pass offenses to being something that really can take an offense and establish dominance. Do you think that there's going to be teams this year in particular that managed to at least come close to doing what the Philadelphia Eagles have been able to do when it comes to that?
Well, first off, probably not, because Philadelphia, Mailata 6'8", 365, and is an unbelievable athlete. Lane Johnson, 6'5", 335, an unreal athlete. Landon Dickerson, 6'6", and 335, and just manhandle
They're giants,
people, right? I mean, they're unbelievable what they've done there as a group up front. But playing offensive line, I always say this: you want to get in a fight with me, start talking about skilled position players. There's no greater skill in the National Football League than moving a man from point A to point B against his will. And offensive line it's a really interesting proposition, right? Because we are collectively the worst athletes on the football team. There is no arguing that point. But I'm expected to beat you 100 out of 100 times, 65 out of 65 plays. If I give up one sack, I'm a piece of garbage and you go to the Pro Bowl. And
Yeah.
so, it's the only position in pro sports or in sports in general where you're matched up against somebody who's the same weight and the same height as you, right? Essentially, but is an exponentially better athlete than you are. And you are, as the worst athlete, expected to win 100% of the battles. And if you don't, you're a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
And so it is like there's no other sport. Like if a 6'3" guard, point guard, blows by a 7-foot center, we don't say, "Hey, let's get rid of that guy. He's no good." No, you say, "Man, they got a great matchup. They got a great switch up." So the nuance of playing that position, and Jeff Stoutland, their offensive line coach in Philadelphia, and their run game coordinator, unbelievable coach, unbelievable technician, but understanding the nuance of that position is what makes it so incredible. I always said we're like a secret mushroom society. Nobody but us knows what we're doing, right? There's nobody. And you think about just how the NFL works. I have watched a corner transition to safety, a safety transition to linebacker, a linebacker transition to DN, a DN transition to D tackle, a D tackle transition to offensive line. The transition from offensive line is fan. There's nowhere else you can go. You're on the very last rung of the ladder, but you're also the backbone of the football team. And we've seen this resurgence last year, especially of the run game. And part of it is because defenses have become so small. They have matched up to offenses with nickel as their base, and so teams are looking at it going, wait a minute, you're going to run an extra DB and there are 2 extra DBs in there and play as dime and think you're going to get away with that. Now offenses are going, well, let's bring in 2 tight ends or let's bring in 2 backs. Let's use our offensive line. Let's get a little 220-pound linebacker or 215-pound safety or 210-pound safety, and let's bludgeon that guy. Let's make them play this game the way it was created to be played. And I, for one, and I love it. It's the way it should be. And I used to have a rule when I played, and it's a standing rule for us as players. If a fight breaks out and it comes between the little guy and the big guy, punch the little guy. The little guys don't hold up as well.
Well, that's a slobber knocker attitude, definitely. I want to talk to you about obviously one of the biggest. I mean, I can't think of. I was trying to think of a comparison to this, and the only thing that came to mind, to me at least, in my lifetime as a fan, is perhaps Andrew Luck's retirement. It's something that just kind of shocks you right before the season begins. I can't believe that the Micah Parsons trade happened. It boggles my mind as someone who obviously pays a lot of attention to the Cowboys. I don't know if you've seen this Netflix documentary. It's pretty crazy. But it has in it, a kind of a sort of example, a shadow of what went on here with the Emmett holdout that happened back in the day. Yeah. I still can't believe that this is something the Cowboys pulled the trigger on. How much are they going to regret this? Are we over-indexing just for the fact that Parsons is so young and everyone sees, things going up? Is he going to be able to integrate in Green Bay quickly? What are your thoughts on that whole debacle?
Yeah, I mean, I just can't believe when a guy becomes a superstar, and he was a superstar from his rookie year, you pay those guys and you keep them as part of your franchise. And, there's almost this unwritten rule, and people clutch their pearls and they whine about, oh, the salary cap. The salary cap is garbage.
Yeah.
It's fake. It's monopoly money. You can manipulate it any way you want to manipulate.
There are crypto coins that are way more real than salary cap.
When teams say, well, it was our salary cap, it means, but they don't want to pay you. Like, if they want to pay you, they find a way to pay you. And the fact that the soap opera continues in Jerry's world, and they just keep pushing these contracts back to the 11th hour to create drama and to create TV shows, the Netflix specials, is insane to me. You knew he was a superstar from day one. Now, there's a lot of people that would sit there and say, hey, listen, he didn't defend the run very well. He gets worn down. Well, I think they made a mistake in Dallas when they moved him on the ball. I thought he was a better off the ball player, and a guy that when you break the huddle, you got to go, where is number 11? Is he middle linebacker? Is he outside linebacker? Is he defensive end? He's rotating through all these different positions. So I'd be like, that to me is what Green Bay should do with Micah Parsons. Play him all over the place. But I think it's just a mismanagement of your team in general because you like the drama. And then you got pissed off and you got your feelings hurt and you got your ego bruised. And then you decided to move him on for, hey, Kenny Clark's a great player at 30 years old. He's a really good. I mean, he's a Pro Bowl player. That's great. And 2 first-round draft choices. I learned this from Joe Gibbs when I first came in the league. I would rather have a known commodity than an unknown commodity. 50% of the guys drafted in the first round are not worth a squirt of piss. So I don't know what you're going to get from those guys, but I know that Micah Parsons can flat out play.
Yeah, no, I mean it's the draft. A draft pick, a first round draft pick, is a mystery box. Micah Parsons, is great, but a mystery box could be anything. It could even be a Micah Parsons.
Let's make a deal. You want a door 1, door 2, or door 3? You may get a donkey. You may get Micah Parsons. I don't know.
The thing that really just shocks the system is seeing this somebody so young traded at this stage. There've been a lot of moves made this offseason. What's one that's underrated from your perspective that could actually really dictate the future of a team, either a quarterback move or something else that happened in terms of free agency and players moving around that you are going to be watching in these first couple of weeks to see what kind of impact it's going to have?
Oh yeah, man. There are so many things that happen in the off season in regards to the draft, in regards to free agency, all those things, like just the Philadelphia Eagles, for instance, just re-signing their guys.
Yeah.
I think what that does for you as a franchise, right? It bolsters your locker room. It makes you feel like, hey, if you do things right with this franchise is going to reward you. Like the opposite of the Dallas Cowboys. I think that stuff is so important. In Denver here, we're really excited about the season. Bo Nix kind of, next level, what he's going to do. I think that the huge, getting Evan Ingram at the tight end position. They have not had a tight end that can control the middle of the field. If he's healthy, he can definitely do that. I think Laramie Tunsil to Washington at the left tackle position is a huge, huge move for Dan Quinn and Washington. And then getting Terry McLaurin signed. Like that dude, when you talk to defensive coordinators around the league, when they're facing Washington's offense, doesn't matter who the quarterback is. It doesn't matter who they have on their team. The number one objective is make sure Terry McLaurin doesn't beat you. Like that's a huge move, him staying within that division. And then, the issues the Bengals have had with Trey Hendrickson and not getting guys signed. It just, like that stuff is, you're taking the best quarterback in football, in my opinion, in Joe Burrow, and you're saying, hey, let's just outscore people. Well, let me ask you this. How did that work for you last year? Oh, you didn't make the playoffs? Or the year before? Oh, you didn't make the playoffs? Yeah, okay. Keep trying that philosophy, because that philosophy is stupid.
So the one question about the Broncos, who obviously have a loaded defense and really, came on strong at the end last year. Do you think that the experience of this kind of crew of quarterbacks who had so much more time, just given the COVID years in college, is going to change the way that people think about, pulling the trigger on some of these guys? You look at somebody as talented physically as like Anthony Richardson. And he's younger than these guys, who had more experience, in college and could play more, for a full set. Do you think that's going to change the attitude towards maybe, leaning toward more experience when these guys are coming out, wanting to see more of that? And does the NIL make that more likely going forward in terms of what we're going to see in quarterbacks?
Yeah, the NIL may keep you in college football a little bit longer, which I think is a good thing, right? That's a good thing to have that experience at the quarterback position. Will it change? Hey, for the smart teams, yeah. But the majority of teams are dumb. And, the majority of the teams get enamored, like we do as fans, at things that are easy to see. We like shiny objects, right?
Yeah.
And what's easy to see is, hey, 40 times in vertical jumps. Oh my gosh, bench press test. Ooh, show me the top 10 bench pressers in the combine history. I'll show you 10 guys who aren't worth a score to piss. They cannot play. That's the bottom line. It's not a bench press contest. When we line up bench presses and 40s out there and box jumps, and that determines the winners, then let's pick the guys that way. The issue is that we get enamored by athleticism, and athleticism is easy for scouting departments to analyze, right? The height, weight, speed triangle. It's easy to look at that stuff and go, okay, this guy can play. And then it absolves you from responsibility. Because if all of a sudden you draft Anthony Richardson, and he had the weight, he had the size, he had the speed, he had the arm talent, he had all that stuff, and he can't play. Well, I did my job. He had everything on he checked every box, but you guys as coaches didn't get him up to speed. So it's your fault, and it saves your job. You keep kicking the can down the road and selling your fan base that some super athlete's going to make the difference. Here's what I always say. Football is easy for football players. It's really hard for athletes.
Mark Schlereth, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. You can check out Mark's podcast, The Stinkin' Truth, and we will obviously be listening and tuning in to you all season. Looking forward to it, and thanks for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show.
And my pleasure, Ben. Take care, buddy.
We'll be right back. Happy to be joined on the Big Ben Show by the great Matt Taibbi. You can find all of his stuff at Racket News. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today, Matt.
Thanks for having me on, Ben. Appreciate it.
So I want to talk to you about a bunch of stuff that's you've been writing about lately and talking about with your wise colleague, Walter Kern. But before I get to that, we haven't had a chance to talk since the last round of what's been playing out over the past couple of months related to the intel community, the material that has been released primarily by Tulsi Gabbard and the DNI offices and what they've been looking at, but by others as well. That has really provided some revelatory material about a number of the key figures that I know you've been writing about and paying attention to over the past several years. Do you view this as something where there was a particularly surprising aspect of it, or is a lot of this confirmation of things that you suspected that would potentially be proven if you had access to this kind of material?
I think there are two ways to answer that question. And first of all, thanks for bringing that up because it's an important topic. The stuff that Tulsi originally released about the House Intelligence Committee study on the origins of Russiagate, that was something that a lot of people, including the acting FBI director, Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino, reported on. I reported on last year with Michael Schellenberger. We've all had hints that this stuff was there, that there was this fudging or cooking of the books to create a phony report about Russian influence in the 2016 election, but we just didn't have the proof. And these emails are confirmation of stories that a lot of us had sort of whiffs of before, but we never saw the actual exchanges. And they're a lot more damning, I think, than a lot of us expected, believe it or not. Some of the other stuff that's come out by particularly the things that Cash has released, or Cash Patel has released, about the leak investigations, about James Comey's behavior and using an intermediary to leak to the media. Some of that stuff is far beyond what some of us expected about the behavior of the FBI. So yeah, it's both expected, but there are also a lot of leads that we didn't know were going to be there.
The reaction, of course, among some corners is to call for orange jumpsuits and they want to see perp walks and things like that. From your perspective, what is the ideal solution here in terms of something that can be a look back at what happened that gives people a clear picture and holds some of these key figures who behaved this way to account, without necessarily going down the road of taking a lot of these old guys and putting them in prison? Or is this the sort of thing where there has to be severe consequences in order to send a message to the intel community going forward, writ large, that this type of behavior cannot be tolerated, regardless of who it stands to benefit politically?
Yeah, I mean, that's less my department than maybe some other things, but I do think that this story is very comparable, for instance, to Watergate, right? Watergate was a story about illegal political espionage. In that case, the White House. Here, it was a combination of different agencies, but they illegally spied on a presidential campaign before the election. They did it using, for the FISA process, they did it using informants. It wasn't exactly the same mechanism, but that was certainly something that had to be punished. And then after that, there was significant illegal behavior, not just in the form of the fudged intelligence community assessment, but also a continual stream of illegal leaks of intelligence that typically earn people very long prison terms. So I think somebody probably does have to go to jail. If people had to go to jail for Watergate, I think somebody has to in this case too. Maybe it doesn't have to be, a life-ending kind of a sentence, but I do think a message has to be sent for sure.
Peter Strzok will have to work pretty hard to grow a mustache as impressive as G. Gordon Liddy's.
Yeah, I don't see a Liddy in this scenario, but yeah.
I want to shift to some of the things that you've been talking about and writing about lately, particularly as it relates to AI. I've been really curious and interested because it's not a topic that I really had read a lot of your stuff on. If you had been writing about it in the past, I just missed it. But it's something that you've been writing about more recently, and you really are hitting a lot of the points that I find to be of interest, particularly about the danger. And you have this in your latest Substack today, in fact, a piece that touches on Sam Altman's writing about transhumanism. Something that I find to be a really disturbing aspect of some of the conversation around this. What made you interested in this subject matter? And was there kind of a point where you started paying attention to it? And were there things that stuck out to you as potentially worrisome about the trend lines that you see going on there?
Sure, that's a really good question. So whenever you cover any story that is technically complicated, like the Twitter files, for instance, one of the first things that you have to do is you have to figure out, well, what's the origin story of all this behavior. Where does it come from? Not just what's the bureaucratic origin, but also the intellectual origin of this stuff. So with that story, the sort of international censorship regime, some of it goes back to post 9/11 counter-terrorist ideas about having to monitor people on social media overseas, and now we've just turned those mechanisms inward. But there was a next step that we could see coming in the Twitter files, where all of this content moderation and social surveillance that was being conducted by people in our survey, we saw that the next iteration of that was going to be AI, and that this was not going to be done by human beings. And, God willing, if there was another Twitter files, you wouldn't even see it in the future. It would all be done automatically. And they do already do this, right? Like, you can see when you go onto ChatGPT that it has certain attitudes about what is and is not a fact that are highly questionable. So I started to get interested in AI at that point, because I was very worried about an AI-based censorship regime, much like the one they do have in Europe already with the Digital Services Act. I was worried they were going to bring that to the States. And I didn't understand the intellectual underpinnings of it, because I don't hang out a lot in Silicon Valley, but this is apparently a big thing there. Like, there's a lot of discussion about this sort of Ubermensch concept of people exceeding human limits and having extremely long lifespans, and maybe even downloading their personalities into computers and that sort of thing. Like, that's a real thing in Silicon Valley, and it drives a lot of this technology. And now we're seeing that coming out, which is really disturbing.
I don't go and hang out normally at events like this, but I was invited to go to Hereticon, one of those gatherings. I don't know if you've been to one of those before, and the heretical idea that I went with was that transhumanism is anti-human, which I think it very much is. For a group of people who talk so much still about like being, we're pro-humanity, we want to, and it's like, no, this is not that. This is something that's anti that on a fundamental level. But I don't think that people broadly understand this yet, about kind of a motivating factor for a lot of very smart, very wealthy, very powerful people, that is, I think, foreign in a lot of ways to the way that people experience life.
Yeah, and I was very reluctant to believe it at first, right? Because when I first started writing about this stuff, and I didn't know really much about AI. It never really interested me before, until we saw it in the censorship issue, and saw how incredibly effective it could be in executing certain kinds of ideas. But there's this incredibly trendy belief system among very wealthy people in this country, and part of what they hope to accomplish is like eternal life. They don't want to die. They want to use their billions to extend their experience, and they believe that that's within their reach. And I've met some of those people, and they really believe it. Now, as for it being inhuman, there's a weird moment where there's kind of a right-wing version of this, or a hyper-capitalist version of this that exists on Silicon Valley, but it also merges with strains of leftist thought that are about this idea that there's no such thing as human nature, that people can be engineered like machines, and society can be engineered. And this goes back to things that began to emerge in the particularly in the 80s and 90s, but existed even before that. And so it's kind of coming to a head now, because you see both left and right versions of this thinking coming together, and it's pretty creepy, I think.
You and Walter Kern, have been going and having a little bit of a book club lately, and with some interesting choices. most recently, C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength, which I think has a lot to say about these topics and things adjacent to them. What was your reaction to that book? I'm just curious because it's one that I read. I would describe it as a book that I read when I was too young to understand it, and then had to revisit it when I got older in order to understand it. Like I could read Out of the Silent Planet, I could read Paralandra, like I could get those when I was a teenager. That Hideous Strength is a pretty hefty sort of read. So, what was your takeaway from it?
Yeah, it is a hefty read. And I have to say, I tried to read it as a young person and couldn't get through it. I was a fan. I wouldn't say I was a fan. There were some dystopian novels and stories that I really enjoyed. Like I really got into 1984. I thought that was like a very tautly written book. Oh, yeah. Philip K. Dick's, various stories, Minority Report, all those things. There's a Russian novel called We that I love, right? By Zamyatin, right? Yeah, and but That Hideous Strength is earlier than 1984. It's a story that's a little harder to follow than 1984 is, but it's incredibly prescient in terms of what it predicted. Now, it's ideas about transhumanism and also about this kind of a subterranean technocratic scientific elite, which has such incredible similarities to groups like the WEF, for instance. It's like uncanny. But also this idea about the ideas about AI. I mean, he couldn't possibly have known that was actually going to happen. But the book itself is almost a one-to-one parallel to things that are happening today. Like there's sort of technocratic elite based in Oxford that is trying to create a post-human intelligence that will live on forever in a disembodied head, which is exactly what the new transhumanists believe. The key part of their ideology is this idea that there's no such thing as human nature in the sense that St. Thomas Aquinas believed it, which is that consciousness is a blend of mind and body and that it's indefinable. No, they believe that consciousness is something that is strictly electrical, that can be downloaded. That's exactly what C.S. Lewis was talking about. And he described it as demonic. Beginning to think that he was right. It's so it's an incredibly interesting novel to read now because so many of its themes exactly coincide with what we're talking about.
It's interesting because there's such a there's this category of fiction that I just really love, and you're smarter and more well-read than I am, so you might know the name for it. But I do really love coming across fiction, particularly as a child. It was Verne, and then when I was a teenager, it was Philip K. Dick and the like, where it's people who are are predicting things or on the cusp of something that doesn't really exist yet. Mm-hmm. And their own predictive approach to it ends up informing the creation of that thing, and
right,
just in the same way that a group of people who grew up on the science fiction of the 70s and 80s, it informs their attitude towards the real life rocket ship creation today, that kind of thing. I just love that aspect of human creativity. The challenge with AI as it relates to censorship, we are I think aware now in America of the trends that have been seen in Europe and particularly in the United Kingdom. We see this story with Graham Linehan just this week, being arrested when he lands in Heathrow by 5 different officers over 3 tweets that he had sent that were viewed as anti-trans. And I think that people are waking up to the fact, as highlighted by J.D. Vance and others, that Europe and particularly the UK have really, lost any vestiges of values related to free speech that they might have once had. The question that I have for you is, where is that going? And do you view AI as kind of a way to dramatically weaponize these human, acts of censorship overnight in a way that could just be a real dark cloud over the whole ability to even have those conversations, to even send those tweets in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrifying. So the first iteration of this censorship bureaucracy was based on a very unwieldy system that involved huge numbers of human reviewers. So the current law that was just passed, which is, I think, one of the most dangerous laws that's ever been passed in the West, the Europe's Digital Services Act, which is essentially a mass censorship law. Originally, it forced the platforms to submit all of their content to the review of people they called trusted flaggers, right? So it was huge numbers of these people who were essentially licensed by the EU to review content. Now, that was bad enough because only a certain kind of person got to be a trusted flagger and certain kinds of organizations. But what you can do now, and we saw this algorithmically a little bit with, the Twitter files and how they were sorting people into groups. Just to take an example, so somebody like Jill Stein was dumped into a group called is_Russian because she retweeted a certain quantity of posts that had a certain theme. So you can do that by machine. And just imagine that done to scale across every conversation on Earth, and people being dialed up or dialed down according to which topics they are talking about, which disfavored people they may be reading or retweeting. With AI, that process no longer becomes labor intensive at all. It just becomes something that a couple of people can do just by turning a few dials. Mm-hmm. And that should make people very frightened, because the technology to do this was already there. The technology to do it easily is what AI can make happen.
And the frightening aspect of that is, in particular, stories that the regime doesn't want to spread. Just, being able to twist a dial and say, everybody who's talking about this, we're just going to shut them all up right immediately. And we're not going to let them know that they've been shut up, because they're still going to see it as if they're just not going to get any interaction or sharing or anything like that. They'll be kept in their little bubble, just sort of screaming into the void about a story that we want to pretend isn't happening, whatever that happens to be. And I think that we unfortunately are living in a time where there was so much investment on the part of the American left in trusting the experts over the past several years, to a degree that I've just never seen one political side embrace so completely. The idea that, like, to question an expert in any capacity was to engage in denialism, engage in misinformation, to be dangerous, to be putting people's lives at risk, all that type of thing. And I'm very concerned that we are now at this level where that type of attitude means that there's nothing that can be questioned. It means that the minute that you have the ability to have some of these folks back in power, some of them have spoken explicitly about the need for more censorship, the need for more control over human connectivity and the way that we communicate with each other. Do you believe that that's a real threat here in America, not just in what we've seen in Europe, but here in America, where we do still believe on some level that we have free speech rights?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons I was so terrified last year is because we saw that there were discussions between American NGOs and American officials in places like the State Department about integrating the United States with the DSA and some other international speech codes. So they had some informal ones, like Europe had something called the Code. God, I forget what it's called, the Code of something in disinformation. Mm-hmm. But these were all precursor laws to the DSA. But there were definitely discussions already about folding us into the DSA. We were already doing on an informal basis what Europe does openly, right? So this idea of intelligence agencies making decisions about certain kind of content, and then having an NGO, which would be your trusted flagger, would make a recommendation to a platform, which would in turn shut things down. Now, in the United States during COVID, that reached the point where they were even making recommendations for de-amplification of true content. An example would be, let's say on Facebook, somebody wants to do a post about a person in their family who had a negative reaction to the vaccine. Now, that might be true. That might have happened. That person might have gotten myocarditis, but the big brain above says, well, this will increase hesitancy, so it qualifies as a form of disinformation. Now, once we saw that reflex, we understood that they were not making true and false decisions. They were making political decisions. And the machine, the AIs won't be able to understand that there's a difference there, that when they decrease things for political reasons, that's different somehow than making an assessment of fact. That's what I worry about this so much. Like, human beings understand that implicitly, but machines don't, and that's what's so scary.
I saw, and I don't know if you've seen it, but it was making the rounds the last day or so, this statement from Malcolm Gladwell, of all people, about looking back at this incident that had happened on a panel where he openly talked about the fact that he was cowed, or he admits that he felt cowed into saying some things about transgender issues that he now feels that he would be brave enough to not say, to disagree with, but also that there would be others that would, I don't know whether that's true or not, that would take a different opinion as well. One of the things I think that is an aspect of this that I find, very concerning is that it's not just something that they can justify based on quote unquote, public safety. Like you use the myocarditis example where the big brain says, well, this is going to discourage people from getting vaccines. Then at least, you could say, okay, you're doing something evil, but you're doing it because you think it's some greater good. And you're just, wrong about that. When it comes to the monitoring and the censorship of speech as it relates to something like this, especially the sort of self-censorship that we just saw happening in response to this trans shooter, that is something where I think people should be a lot more concerned about that, because that's not an example where, you have any real claim to saying that this is going to prevent, some kind of health disaster, or we're just trying to, keep people in the Superdome instead of, letting them wander the streets post Katrina. There is no real argument to be made there. And yet they still are going down that same road. Is this compelled feeling to censor by our so-called elites something that we need to have a more organized campaign against, just given that there are so many people who I think instinctively recognize that it's not the right thing. It's not the American way, certainly, but it's also not something that, is in any way pro free speech, pro, the kind of freedom that most of us, I think, believe in. It seems like there's still kind of a lackluster campaign against it. And people are just resting on the laurels of having, the likes of a lot of these dismissed doctors or people who were critics of the COVID agenda in charge at the current moment. Which we can't have any faith in will be the case in the long term.
Yeah, so two things about that. First of all, about Malcolm Gladwell. I saw that, the irony, unbelievable. I debated Malcolm Gladwell in Canada along with Douglas Murray. He was on the other side, and the question of the night.
I remember this. I think I saw something from this. Yes,
right. Yeah, so it was amazing. So the proposition was, should you trust the mainstream media? And I gave an initial speech. I talked about how I came from a family of journalists and that I had always loved the business, but that unfortunately we had lost the public's trust. I brought up the fact that Walter Cronkite had twice been voted the most trusted person in America in the early 70s and in the mid 80s. Malcolm Gladwell spent the entire debate essentially calling me a racist for yearning for the time of Walter Cronkite when there were no blacks or women in media. And I think single-handedly lost the debate. Like, we won that debate by the largest margin in the history of the event. Really not part of it was Douglas Murray's eloquence, but I think a bigger part was just how obnoxious Malcolm was about the whole thing. Now, the irony for me is that now he's, post factum, years later, admitting one of the more obvious things that people should have been able to admit, is remarkable. The second part of that is, okay, why did people once trust the media? It was because reporters, especially in my father's era, journalists aren't the smartest people in the world. We're not people who went to med school. We're not people who we're not rocket scientists. The one quality, though, that you have to be a good journalist is you have to be brave. Like, that's the one thing that people expect of us, is that we'll tell you the truth no matter what it costs, right? And the defining quality of this era's journalists is that they're all wimps. Like, they're people like Gladwell who are afraid of a little bit of blowback among their friend circle, and so they don't tell you the truth. Like, that can't happen, right? So I think they're being punished already in terms of the loss of audience, but yeah, people need to be aware that that's what's going on in media.
But if I write this, what will people say, Matt?
Right. I mean, can you imagine Seymour Hersh caring? Right? Like, that guy wouldn't have cared. Like, he doesn't expect to have friends. That's the whole point. If you go into media expecting to have friends, like, you're in the wrong business.
I mean, my look, I'm by no means a journalist to your stature, or to anyone else's, really. But the truth is that I have always viewed it as a trade that's similar to, and a craft that is similar to, the work of a gumshoe. And the gumshoe ends up alone at the end of the bar at the end of the night.
Of course.
Because everybody knows you're either looking for somebody who's cheating, or you're looking at somebody who's like, if you show up, that's not a good day in my life, that kind of thing. And that's the attitude that I think most people should have towards actual working journalists, is that, if I get a call from them, and that's something that I feel like is almost completely lost in this era of journalism. There's some exceptions to that, and they tend to stand out, but it really is a complete change in attitude towards what the whole point of the career even is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, most reporters I know grew up reading like Raymond Chandler, and so their idols were, Philip Marlowe. He's the guy who's drowning in his scotch at the end of the book, by himself, and lives in a little tiny room, and doesn't have any friends. But you're all right? Like, it was all worth it. And the image of the reporter as this kind of lone crusader who the satisfaction is in the work. There's a long tradition of that in this country. You think about people like I.F. Stone, who was kind of renounced by people in the business, and that put out a little newsletter and lived in his little house, and he was happy. He was fine with it. It's very different now. It's a very social profession where people hang out in parties in the Upper West Side and in Georgetown, and it's just different. I don't know what to say about it.
I have just one or two more questions for you. One is, in terms of your view of the industry right now, we've seen this outpouring of people from these legacy institutions into venues like Substack and others. Everybody has a podcast, etc. Especially a lot of the longer in the tooth folks who've been in this industry for a long time, who took buyouts from major news organizations and the like. I'm curious as to your attitude about the changes that are happening within this industry. What do you think is a good sign about the health of what's going on? And what's being lost in terms of this shift? My own bias toward this is just that I feel like people are really losing the the understanding of the importance of having really solid teams, even if they're small, particularly on editorial and research. That basically, there's so many people who are just trying to do this as kind of lone out there in their lonely area, and they're talking to their friends. It's Chris Cillizza talking to Chuck Todd on YouTube and that kind of thing. And it's like, if you actually want to do this work and do it well, you need an editor and you need research help in order to be able to, produce the kind of stories and material that can stand on their own and really impress people, as opposed to just being, opinions that, someone like me can just shoot off at the hip without having to do that kind of work. No, I still try to, but it's one of these things where I feel like we are losing something important with the shift that is happening, even if a lot of people are finding it profitable at the moment.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and we are losing some big things now. I love Substack. I was one of the early contributors to the platform. I love the guys who put this business together. I think they had a lot of foresight. The problem is, what Substack doesn't pay for is exactly what you're talking about. It's all the support staff. It's foreign bureaus. It's beats, right? So the things that institutional journalism had before that were really important, you put somebody in one little corner office of the New York Times and say, your job forever is to watch the EPA, right? And so that person spends a lifetime developing sources, and it's a long process to develop sources. Like, it takes forever. And the newspaper at that point has the ability to be reactive to any story that happens. There's that. And then the other thing, which is what I used to do for a living at Rolling Stone, they would say, hey, Matt, take 10 weeks and go investigate this. I can't do that anymore. Like, you need to crank out content. So investigative journalism is also something that we just don't know how to pay for yet. I do, though, have confidence that it will get there somehow, because the money's out there. It just hasn't been organized in a way to deliver all that product. But America, as opposed to a lot of other countries, has a very good tradition of innovating in journalism. So I do think that eventually that will happen. One thing I would guess that is not going to happen is that the solutions will come from legacy media. I think those organizations are going to die, and what's going to arise is going to come out of, shows like yours, or, Joe Rogan's, or, that whole landscape of independent media. That's where it's going to come from.
I really have to say that I envy so much the job that you had at Rolling Stone, because that was the job that I wanted to have when I got out of college, and I missed the moment. I wanted it to be National Geographic, but still,
that's so funny. That's what I wanted to do as a kid.
Go I wanted to go someplace for 10 weeks and learn everything about it, and then write some big thing, and just do that over and over and over again. And then by the time that I got into the industry, all those jobs were dying. So,
I felt like I had the last gig like that for a while. And,
I mean, it's really, but you lose something important with that. I mean, we don't have that type of writing anymore, and I think that there is something important that is lost along the way, because you get a fullness of knowledge of the subject that you just can't get by parachuting into a place for a day or two. Right. Last question for you. In terms of your relationship with Walter, which I love, what are some of the things that you've gained out of the back and forth that you've had? Because it's funny to drop in and listen to the two of you talk, and you're very different people, obviously, in a lot of ways. But he's a very interesting character. What has that relationship been in terms of a gain for you, and what you've taken away from it?
So first of all, it's been great. Like, Walter is a great friend. I think that's one of the things that we're conscious of when we do the show, is that the audience gets to enjoy the fact that we're having fun with each other, hanging out. Walter's a little bit older than me, but basically we have we have sort of similar psychological backgrounds. I would say we were both kids who buried themselves in books at an early age because we were a little bit nerdy. They happen to be the same books, actually. We were just talking about this, about how we both discovered Sherlock Holmes at the same time.
I've got the giant annotated Sir Arthur Conan, the complete annotated version. Yes,
I got one right here.
Yeah, that's great.
It's so funny. So we're both, very bookish people. And the original idea of the show was that we would just, talk about things and talk through things. When we started doing the book part of the show, I think that's when it took on this really interesting character, because what we were trying to do is link things that were happening in modern times to kind of more eternal themes that you would get in books. So I've learned a lot from Walter. Walter taught literature at Princeton. He's a legitimate academic authority on these things. He's written, a dozen novels and some very interesting and important ones too. Mm-hmm. And so that's the job I always wanted. He does what I wanted to do for a living. I think in our discussions, despite the fact that we probably politically are pretty close at this point, we come at things from a different point of view. Like, I'm much more the traditional journalist, and he tries to look for the bigger, broader themes, and he's very good at expressing those. So I think it's an interesting interplay, and I hope people enjoy the show. So it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
It's always great to have a chance to talk to you, Matt Taibbi. You can check out all of his work at Racket News. And thank you so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today.
Thanks a lot, Ben. I really appreciate it. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Great talking with you. Time for today's grab bag, folks. I want to thank you for all the comments that you left last week on our YouTube channel. A ton of comments about vacation stories and the like. Here's one from Bob Kelly 8644. I took our 7-year-old twins to Disneyland deliberately on a rainy day. We're from Seattle. Light rain, warm, nothing to worry about at all, but it kept all the locals away. No crowds at all. We rode every ride we wanted without waiting. In fact, you get quite worn out running from the exit of a ride back to its entrance without any standing time in between. And this is the kind of thing that I'm telling you, folks. We got to start getting away from the idea that we got to have perfect weather every time we do something with kids. It's just one of those things where it's like, you don't want to miss the opportunity. And that's definitely awesome, Bob, that you had that experience with your 7-year-olds. I want to encourage you all to continue to leave comments and subscribe, rate, review everywhere you see this podcast. It really helps us boost things up. And I appreciate all the great feedback that we've had over the past couple of months. One of the things that I was paying attention to in the past couple of weeks was this news that we were waiting for about the summer box office returns. It was one of these things where this was finally the chickens coming home to roost, because there was this whole mantra in Hollywood, survive until 25, that theater owners and a bunch of the different executives were using coming out of the COVID years and strikes and everything like that. Survive till 25 was the mantra. And the idea was, once we got to this year, in particular this summer, everyone would be back in theaters. Things would be going just great. But here's what the Hollywood Reporter has in terms of their reporting about this. A box office that kept slumping with revenue well behind pre-pandemic levels. Perhaps the mantra disappeared this summer when it became clear that not even the likes of Superman or even bigger and scarier dinosaurs could save the day. As the summer season wraps on September 1st, Hollywood is facing the worst case scenario. May to Labor Day ticket sales in North America barely matched the $3.67 billion collected in 2024, even if the deficit was only $7 million, piling in on Universal and Antlin's re-release of Steven Spielberg's 50-year-old Jaws beat 2 new studio films domestically over Labor Day. That's a sad state of affairs, and it's even sadder when you look back at how things were just over a decade ago. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine online about the difference in box office between Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, which came out in 2013, and this James Gunn's Superman, which came out this summer, obviously, and the gap there in terms of income, where Man of Steel obviously made a ton more money and sold a ton more tickets. The interesting thing about that, of course, was that a lot of people raise the absence of foreign markets. You don't have China to the same degree anymore. You don't have Russia at all, and that certainly plays a role. But the real difference there is even bigger when you look at the inflationary picture. The average ticket price back in 2013 to get your butt into a movie theater seat was less than $9, and now it's more than $16. This is just not a scenario that is able to sustain itself. Theaters are not going to be able to survive an environment where the biggest movie of the summer is K-pop Demon Hunters on Netflix, which gets limited release in theaters. You're going to have to really, I think, adopt a different methodology, a change in your approach in order to try to get people into these seats with event screenings and with the ideas that once made movies something that people didn't feel like they could miss. And if they did miss them, they knew that they weren't going to get on streaming within the next 3 months or so. That's something that has to fundamentally change about the industry. And it's one of the reasons that I agree with a lot of these theater owners, particularly the folks over at AMC, that having these limited windows, these short releases that turn around and are available to stream, within the next 60 to 90 days is something that's going to fundamentally hamper this industry. I love movie theaters. I love movies, and I want us to get back to them, but they've got to increase the level of experience to match up with the amount of money that they're charging us to go there. And it's not just going to be with stale popcorn. I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can email us at bigben@fox.com. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.